What is going on, everybody? I am Michael Keefe. He is Fred Greetham, and you are inside the Browns beat. Welcome on in to another great show here on a Wednesday night where we have got a lot of fun planned for you. Browns might not be a lot of fun right now, but we've talked about it. If we were 0-1 in our comfort zone last week, we are basically in a plush pillow protected bed this week at 0-2 as the Cleveland Browns fell to the Ravens. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what we saw. And then on the back half of the show, we are going to bring in from the Cleveland Browns, one of the staff writers for the Cleveland Browns. She does a great job. Kelsey Russo is going to join us to talk all things Cleveland Browns as well. So welcome on in, settle in, because we have got a great hour of Cleveland Browns football to bring to you. If you're joining us live here, whether it's on YouTube or Twitch, one, make sure you hit subscribe, make sure you hit like, and share the show. Tell people to watch the show because it's a good time. Make sure you get live in the comments, ask whatever questions you have, and we'll do our best to get to those, especially when we get Kelsey on a little bit later in the show. Also, just a little order of business. Get over to theobr.com, hit subscribe so you can read all of the best written Browns content, and you can check out all the best video content like Fred's amazing 2-minute check-ins on a daily basis. You can catch all those things on the socials and at theobr.com. Fred, here we are, man. 0-2. I just feel like I know right where we're at here. I feel like I'm right where I belong.
Yeah, and you don't want to add pain to it, but that 3-14 season, if you remember, I think last year got blown out by the Cowboys, then went down and beat the Jaguars for one of their wins. So they were 1-1. Yeah, this is the first time Kevin Stefanski started 0-2 in his 6 years. I don't know if that's a good sign, bad sign. It's probably a bad sign. He's always been able to avoid that 0-2 start, which doesn't bode well long-term for any NFL team. But in the age of expanded playoffs, I believe there were 3 teams last year that made the playoffs after starting 0-2, when before they expanded an extra game and expanded the playoffs, it was almost unheard of to make the playoffs after going 0-2. Even though we're not talking playoffs, that's always, kind of the meter or the bar, whether you're going to have anything to play for. And obviously it's early in the season, but Mike, we talked about it forever in the offseason once the schedule came out, these first 6 games, and the Packers might be better than a lot of people thought they would be and look like a legitimate Super Bowl contender. And then you have, the Lions and the Vikings. Now, Browns luck, J.J. McCarthy would return for that game, and so
I might be okay with that.
Yeah, it's not really, the greatest start, but you got to find a way somehow this week at home to get back in the win column, 8 games in a row, like, kind of a continuation of last year. You lost the last 6, fresh start, 0-2.
Yeah, and the 0-2 start, there's no reprieve, like you said. The Jaguars were a reprieve last year in the beginning of that schedule, where it was like, all right, well, tough go against the Cowboys, but you get the Jaguars next. And, man, the Jaguars and the Browns have a funny relationship as far as 2 teams that really just understand how to lose games. And you had a little reprieve. Well, there's no reprieve coming for the Cleveland Browns in these first 6 weeks, as, again, the Cincinnati loss was tough. The Baltimore loss, Fred, I want to talk about the Baltimore loss for a minute because I leave the Cincinnati loss feeling like, oh, wow, the Browns outplayed the Bengals in virtually every facet of the game. The Browns looked much better, looked much more competent than they did pretty much all of last year offensively. And you lose because your kicker doesn't make kicks. And I know they won't say that because they'll say there's a lot of reasons they lost. But the reality is your kicker doesn't make kicks and you lose. And you should be 1-0 after week 1. But I still felt all right after that game. It just kind of felt like I kind of thought they were going to win that game. So now they're going to have to beat a team that I thought they were going to lose to. And they're going to have to kind of figure that out. This Ravens game, I didn't think they were going to win anyways. But, man, I left this game feeling like I was watching, Fred, the 3-14 team from last year. It looked almost identical to so many games that we watched last year, didn't it, Fred? It was if again, you would have told me, I know we talked about it last week. If you would have told me going into Cincinnati's game that they were going to hold the Cincinnati to the stats that they had in that game, Joe Burrow was going to throw for like no yards and offensively Cincinnati was going to be inept and you were going to lose that game, you would think you were crazy. If you would have said they would have held the Baltimore Ravens in total under 50 yards rushing, in total, the Ravens didn't rush for 50 yards, and that includes all of them. If you would have said that going into the game, you'd think, man, they got a shot. They got a shot. And instead, it was a really, really excellent defensive performance like we saw so many times to start games last year, Fred. And then it was the offense that just absolutely could not get anything figured out. And you saw it by the end. You can only give Baltimore so many short fields and easy opportunities before they take advantage. This was a close game in the first quarter. It was a close game in the second quarter. Shoot, it was a close game in the third quarter. And ultimately, the offense, more so than the Baltimore Ravens did, the offense wore down the defense.
Yeah, sure did. And, like, again, statistically, you hold Derrick Henry to 23 yards and you hold
Right.
Lamar Jackson to 13. That's a recipe, for a win in itself because those are the big weapons. But it's always something that they're not, and I know Kevin Stefanski keeps talking about complementary football. And it's like I'm saying again when he's talking about it today, yeah, I'm all for that. You got to do that, not just keep talking about it. I blame the special teams on last week's game because that punt return for 23 yards got the Ravens going. The defense buckled and held them to a field goal. But then you get a block punt, set them up for a touchdown. It's 10-0, and then it's Katie bar the door. The offense gave them two other touchdowns, the scoop and score fumble, and the pick. It wasn't a pick six, but returned it to the 5-yard line. So that's 24 of the 41 points that I, attribute to turnovers. I know they don't count the block punt as a turnover, but that's a turnover. And, you can't win when you are not explosive on offense. We saw the way they have to play to win against the Bengals. Great defense, but they didn't take the ball away and they turned it over twice. Last week, you had officially 2 turnovers that resulted in 14 points. But like I said, you count the special teams, it's really 21 or 24. And yeah, I think part of it, I always have a theory with the NFL. It's a week-to-week league because the Ravens lost that 41-40, to the Bills in the opener. That really worked against the Browns because the defense hurt all week. You gave up 41 points. You guys stink. And they made a concerted effort to go all and shut the Browns down the whole game. And I'm saying the Browns contributed, but that in itself. So I think there are some silver linings. If you remember in the past, even when they were good a couple of years ago, the defense didn't play well on the road. And we kept saying, why can't they play well on the road? Well, they played well on the road now and well at home. And if you got this version of the defense every week, you just got to get the offense going. I guess the silver lining here is I do think there is a sliver of hope that Quinshon Judkins can provide a spark in the running game. They're going to have to throw the ball. They're going to have to do some other things, especially not turn the ball over. But that gives you a little hope. And I don't know what to say about the defense. The biggest thing is not takeaways. I mean, you saw, I think it was Mitchell made a great punch the ball out on Derrick Henry. I think there's 4 Browns around Henry, and a trailing wide receiver dives on the ball from behind. That would have taken, a touchdown away. And then Devin Bush, who's been playing great, by the way, dropped an interception in the end zone. Next play was a touchdown, 4th down. Jackson to the receiver. It's stuff like that. Good teams find a way to make those plays where bad teams find ways to not make those plays.
Yeah, I was going to talk, Fred, and you literally just, it's a beautiful transition. It's like you've been doing this for a long time, Fred. I was going to talk about the areas on each side of the ball that are concerning, and I was going to go to that defense first because we talked about it last year. They were so in the red in the turnover margin, and that's the way this year's starting. Again, the Browns through 2 weeks have not been able to turn over either the Bengals or the Baltimore Ravens. And again, two offenses that are really good. You played great against the Bengals offense, and you still weren't able to turn them over. Like one turnover in that game probably wins you the game. And with the Ravens, you kind of have to. You have to take advantage of the times that they're going to give you the ball, and they're not doing it. So when you hear people talking in Berea in the headquarters there, when you hear whether it's Stefanski or whether it's really any of the coaching staff, Jim Schwartz, whoever, I mean, what are they saying about this? Like, what is the thought process here on why they cannot take the ball away from the other team?
Well, I think nobody has a concrete answer, but one of the things is when you're playing from behind, um, the other team doesn't have to, you know, be aggressive and throw the ball downfield. And they had 3 sacks in the game. They didn't get a strip sack, but when they did have the opportunities, they couldn't, convert and get the takeaway. So I don't know. I know they practice it. I watch them every day, at least in training camp when we were allowed to watch practice, and they talk about it. But that's where your playmakers come in, find a way to make that play. There was little things. I like that Delpit punched that touchdown out of Andrews' hands. I mean,
Yeah.
I thought that was a for sure touchdown. He secured it, but then they have that roll and he didn't give up and he knocked it out. And they said, okay, yeah, it's not a catch. But if you could do that out on the playing field, then you have a chance to get that turnover. So I don't know. They seem to come in bunches, but it's been a drought now,
For
almost
2 years.
2 years where they
Yeah,
haven't really
like
taken the ball away. And, you know, you'd think in 2 games you would have had one. I look at the Packers. They have not thrown any interceptions. Jordan Love has no interceptions in 2 games, and they have not fumbled. So they have not turned the ball over. They took it away once. So they're in the plus category, not by a lot, just by the one takeaway. But, you know, for a team like the Browns, that would set their defense apart. If they were a ball hawking secondary and, strip sacks on the quarterbacks, they're getting pressure, I think that could change things. But, so far it's the same old, and kind of talking excuses after the game. But, you hope you got a new start this week. Maybe the Packers coming on the road, will have a little bit of a letdown seeing the Browns on the schedule. I don't know, but the Browns can't afford to let down. They have to play about their best game to get back on the winning track. And they really need to do it this week, because you have the danger when you're 0-2, you go to 0-3, all of a sudden now it starts getting in the minds of a lot of these young guys, how do we, are we ever going to win a game? And
Yep.
you got to remember they got 13 young guys, so they have to learn how to win. And that's where the veterans, that's what's disappointing with Joe Flacco. He's to be the steady hand at the wheel, and he can't turn the ball over. And he threw the ball into coverage literally twice. The one was intercepted.
Yeah.
That other one should have been intercepted. It counts as a touchdown, but it was literally Tillman just standing in the end zone. The ball landed in his hands, which was fortunate, but that should have been intercepted as well. So he cannot put the ball in harm's way. That's what he's out there for.
Yeah, exactly. And again, they've got to figure out a way when they're presented. You brought up the couple times where they were presented with opportunities for turnovers, and they just are not coming up with them. They've got to figure out a way to do that. On the other side of the ball, though, Fred, if we go to the offense, yeah, we could talk about a little bit of the hope, and obviously we're about 15 minutes away from adding Kelsey Russo from the Browns into this conversation. But Fred, we're talking about it again this year, and Kevin Stefanski's talking about it again this year. through 2 games, Fred, offensively, there just is no explosion with this team. There's no big plays really. It felt like watching that game that the Baltimore Ravens knew everything that the Cleveland Browns were trying to do every time they were trying to do it. And there's no explosive plays. Even when we're at a point now where if they complete a pass for 6 or 7 yards, it feels like, oh, cool, that's a great play for the Cleveland Browns. And so I know you're in the building and you're listening to them talk. I've heard Kevin Stefanski talk about wanting to get the offense more explosive, but it's very bland right now. And it's kind of soft. And I don't know. What do you think the process is there? And what are you hearing out of the building?
Well, yeah, I mean, the longest play was a 26-yard pass to Judy last week, and they haven't had a play over 30 yards. I wasn't expecting that at all. With Joe Flacco, what we saw 2 years ago,
right?
He threw all over the field to Amari Cooper, and in my opinion, even 2 years ago, Jerry Jeudy should be more explosive than Amari Cooper was 2 years ago, and we haven't seen that at all. And I know Judy's dropped a couple of balls, but you haven't really seen the deep ball. You got Isaiah Bond, advertised, fastest guy, on the team and his speed. At least take a shot. It's been more dink and dunk and so forth. That's again where I think the Quinshon Judkins getting him up to speed. If he was a threat like Nick Chubb was, that the defense could not relax, that opens up the play action pass so much more, downfield and so forth. But I don't think anybody's really been worried about the Browns running game with Jerome Ford. You saw basically he was dropped to the end of the list, as soon as Judkins is ready to go. And I think it's the 1-2 punch. They plan on Judkins and then Sampson on third down and out of the backfield like we've seen. So, yeah, they need to stretch the field. They need to throw it downfield. And part of it's been also the receivers have dropped balls. They've continually dropped passes. Judy had a couple more the other day, and it didn't look like they were getting separation. Now, Judy was asked about that today, and he really challenged the reporter. One of the guys we're going to have on here next week, Jeff Shadell, about, did you watch the film? Watch the film, and I'm like, we're not watching the film. That's not our job to see. You're to get open. But he inferred that he was open at least, and they weren't getting them the ball. And so we'll see. But you have to have a little bit of separation, but you have to have that running game going so the defense respects it a little bit. And that's where, it's interesting. The Packers are right behind the Browns in rushing defense. The Browns are 1. Packers are like a yard behind at 2. Yeah. But when you look at it, they've been playing from the lead, and the other teams have been throwing and not running. So that's kept the numbers down for the opposing offenses. And I think that's a chance the Browns can run the ball on their 2 inside guys. They have obviously Parsons and Gary on the outside, great pass rushers. But between the tackles, Browns haven't had it. This is a chance to see if Quinshon Judkins in the running game can really get going on the inside there and open things up a little bit in the passing game.
Yeah. And if we want to, it's real easy to dive into the negatives. Again, this feels so bad because it's 0-2. But I do think a lot of people, I don't know that a lot of people had the Browns beating the Ravens in this game. So if you take it just one game at a time, it feels like a very kind of standard outcome. The Browns just made it look much worse. And the final score looks worse than really what the game was. But if we want to talk about things that are positive, you brought it up there for a minute, but we saw 13 touches for Quinshon Judkins, a decision that came really late. It kind of surprised everybody. The report last week was that Judkins would play, but then it comes out before the game. You were one of the ones that reports it, that Quinshon Judkins is going to start, and he's going to be the first guy out there. They get him, I think, 13 touches. And there's a lot of reasons for optimism. Obviously, on a couple of those touches, he got hit in the backfield before he was really able to make anything happen. But when you look at, I think I saw one of the stats that in just 13 carries through 2 weeks, Quinshon Judkins immediately in the running back situation becomes one of the top 10 players in the league in broken tackles already, and he only touched the ball 13 times. So I was really encouraged by what I saw to Quinshon Judkins, especially knowing that he's probably only going to get a little better after not being with the team through camp and all that. What about Judkins did you like, Fred?
Well, I know he got the 31-yard run late, but you still saw him run through tackles, and you could see that burst. And I think more than anything, they wanted, even though he only had 2 practices, one in pads, they wanted him to get his feet wet because they knew this is they were going to, put the load on him. And why not? I mean, you invested a 36th pick overall, second round. They've never, under Andrew Berry, they've never went that high to obtain a running back in free agency or in the draft. Jerome Ford, the 5th round, was the most so you knew they had to love him in order to make that pick and pull that trigger. And that's why I think it was so devastating when he got the off the field, issues just before training camp, because that derailed it. And so now they have him, and we don't know if he's going to be sidelined due to his suspension or not. But when you have him, you might as well put him to work and get all you can and force feed him. Last week, the coaches said they didn't really give him the whole training camp install or anything. They just gave him basically the game plan for last week because it was just a bite-sized portion, and they'll add a little more, but basically now they're into the game planning. So it'll be, what's the game plan for this week? And you saw when Sampson, they had him in on a passing down and he didn't make a block at all. Now, hopefully he'll learn to do it, but these guys have to block. I mean, Jerome Ford went back in because at least he could chip or block. And Judkins, I think, has proven he can do that type of thing and then slip out. So I was impressed with him for 2 practices. He doesn't appear, I think they just kept saying, how you doing? He came out of the game in good shape. I saw him out there today. He wasn't holding back any in the little bit we got to watch practice. So I just think you just keep adding to it, It'll be interesting because we know how Nick Chubb, how good he was, and we were always complaining, how come you're not giving him more than 15 carries a game? Chubb consistently got 15 to 18 carries. Judkins, 2 days practice, had 10 carries and 3 catches. So I would think you'd got to get him up to near the 20 carry mark and see what he can do. If you can move the ball on the ground, I think it'll help your offense completely and not rely on having to throw 45 times, because I don't think anybody here thinks the formula for the Browns winning is Joe Flacco throwing 45 times a game. He threw 45 times against the Bengals and 45 times against the Ravens.
Is this bad? Is this bad, Fred? Real quick, what'd you hear? Maybe I missed it, or maybe I just was chasing my kids around or whatever. But what'd you hear from the Browns, Fred, as far as just the explanation for, like, hey, Quinshon Judkins was in the building for like a minute, and now he's your starter, and that was the decision. What did you hear out of the organization as far as what went into that decision, and just kind of how they explained that?
Well, if anybody doesn't know, when they put out the depth chart, unofficial, because I know everybody knows that's put out by the PR department. And so, Judkins was listed yesterday on the unofficial depth chart as the starting running back, which was, I noted that. I knew, but we all know that's where it's going. So Stefanski was asked, does this mean a commitment to Judkins because he was put first on the depth chart? Well, Stefanski used that opening and pointed to Peter Jean-Baptiste, the PR director, and say, that's the guy that makes the depth chart. I have my own depth chart. So he wouldn't answer that question, but we all know he just said, oh, he's doing great. We're going to keep adding to it and so forth. There was no announcement, as you remember. It was Saturday. They just said he'd been activated. Well, you knew he was going to play if he was activated because you had to cut somebody. You cut Gage Lavardane, who, by the way, was brought back yesterday to the practice squad. But yeah, so if he's active and you cut a guy, he's going to play. I kind of got the idea that he would play a lot. I thought maybe they'd run Jerome Ford out for the first play at least, then he was the starter, but no, they just said, Judkins, you're out there, you're the guy. And so I expect that to be, this hasn't necessarily been beating him out. He was that guy as soon as he arrived in rookie minicamp. You knew he was going to be the bell cow, when they picked him. And you also asked Jerome Ford to take a 50% pay cut or they were going to, release him. And so that's really why he's with the team instead of Nick Chubb, in my opinion. So anyway, that's kind of there, and we'll see what happens, with him. But I expect a lot to go through him. I think he's your best chance to get this offense on track running the ball.
Do you feel, just as a question to you, Fred, do you feel like, because a part of me does feel like this, and I don't know why they would be doing this. It doesn't make any logical sense to me. But the way these games have been called, these first two games, first against the Bengals and now against the Ravens, it feels like they're still in kind of vanilla ball preseason play calling mode. Like it doesn't seem like they're throwing a lot out there that's going to get the defense off the scent of what they're trying to do. It feels like everything is quick. They're trying to like dink and dunk their way down the field. Again, we've heard Kevin talk about it not being explosive. I don't know whether it's because it's Tommy Rees in his first couple games as the offensive coordinator. Obviously, you've got Kevin out there. Do you just feel like they're slow to kind of take the reins and loosen them a little bit and really let the offense go? Because that's, to me, when I watch the offense, it's what I feel. I don't see anything they're doing that's going to result in any of that explosiveness.
Well, I do. And I think it's a little surprising because that was why I felt all along they would go with Joe Flacco, because you can trust him to, take shots and know when to throw it away, when not to. And the first game, I think it was masterful. Those two interceptions were not his fault, and you had 4 or 5 drop passes. Last week, that was his fault. The sack fumble, instead of just getting rid of the ball or go down and throwing it into coverage, twice. One was intercepted, one bounced for a touchdown. So, yeah, it is kind of that you bring that up. It is kind of strange, because unless they just didn't feel like they had the running game, so they had to throw those little dink and dunks, kind of like extended handoffs. That's what you saw against the Bengals. So, yeah, it's they're going to have to open it up, but obviously they're playing, some pretty good defenses. The Ravens are a good defense. Packers are going to be a good defense. Lions, Vikings. So it's not going to get any easier, but I would like to see Stefanski, take some shots. He is calling the plays, even though Reese has got the title of offensive coordinator. This is up to Kevin Stefanski in what's being called. So we'll see going forward.
Awesome. Well, listen, the Browns are 0-2. Again, a familiar spot for all of us that talk about the Browns. It's what we do. We talk about 0-2. Hopefully we don't have to talk about 0-3, but it is it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge at Huntington Bank Field this week as the Green Bay Packers come in. And to get us ready, it's time for us to head on over into our second segment of the show with our special guest. And we're excited for this one because we have got from the Cleveland Browns, staff writer for the Browns, does a little editing, does a little bit of everything. And she does a tremendous job covering the Browns. I see her in the background now, so we're going to bring her in. Joining inside the Browns beat, Kelsey Russo. Welcome on in, Kelsey.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining us. Appreciate you.
Of course.
Hey, Kelsey.
Hi,
I
everyone.
know she sits next to me. We sit next to each other in the media room, so we chit chat quite a bit. And, this is kind of interesting and fun for me. I was the first writer for ClevelandBrowns.com when the team came back in 99 till 2001. Then I joined the OBR, moved on. And Kelsey is the current ClevelandBrowns.com. So, I feel like I'm an alumni of that group, and now I have one of my fellow players. I know, George. We were talking today. You're from Northeast Ohio. I think you grew up in Hudson and went to University of Georgia. You were a dog
I
down
am.
there, and bring us up to date, kind of your career path, how you've got to the Browns.
Yeah, so like you said, so I graduated from the University of Georgia in 2019 with a journalism degree and sports journalism focus. And then right afterwards, I started freelancing for The Athletic covering the Atlanta Dream. So that summer of 2019, I followed the Dream. I was the main beat writer following them that season. And I got to do some pretty cool stories throughout that season. They struggled on the court, but I got to do some really cool features of who the players were, their interests, that kind of thing. And then that lasted just through their regular season. So in kind of around August, I was looking for my next opportunity, and there was a position open to cover the Cavs for the Athletic. And so I applied, went through the interview process, and was offered the job. So I moved back to Cleveland in September of 2019, and then I spent the next 4 years covering the Cavs, which was so fun. So I kind of rode that roller coaster too of, those early years in 2019, 2020 when they were really young and won 19, 20 games, and just kind of followed like Darius from a really young age, Isaac, all those guys. And I was one of two beat writers that traveled. So I went on the road for road games, really covered them closely, and then kind of just followed that rise, through the last couple of years, which was like so fun. It was really cool to be a part of that and to see them build that foundation and, be there for the 19, wins versus then my last year, they made the playoffs. They played the Knicks. So that was really cool to kind of see that progression and be with those guys throughout that process. And then I started with the Browns in the first week or week one, the Wednesday of week one of the 2023 season, which was crazy. I got thrown right in, Wednesday week of that week, and I covered my first game on that Sunday. But it's been a really cool opportunity to be with the team now and kind of see the perspective from the team side of it. So, there are different little nuances, obviously, of being from or covering a team from an outside perspective versus covering it internally. But it's been really cool, and I've really enjoyed some of the opportunities I've gotten in this position, especially over the last couple of years, as I've gotten more comfortable and grown in this role to develop it into, what I have today.
Man, to the University of Georgia, I've spent a minute between the hedges for some reason ordering bags of boiled peanuts.
As you
That's a
should.
thing down there. Oh my God. I've seen it. I've been to a couple Georgia games down there. That's a good time. My team's a different SEC team, but we don't really have a rivalry. We're over in Texas, but that's pretty cool. Sanford Stadium is a great place to watch a game. Great place to watch a game.
So fun. I had, we saw some really good games while I was there. And I covered the team my junior and senior year when I was at Georgia. So that was cool too. Of, the first 2 years was a fan, saw Nick Chubb play, he was there while I was in college. So that was really cool to then, honestly, when I came to the Browns, I was like, we were at school at the same time, we were at Georgia at the same time. So that was cool to have that connection. And then covering the team at Sanford Stadium was really sweet too. The press box is amazing from their perspective. It's open. And so you're kind of really in the thick of the atmosphere and everything. So it was a cool experience for sure.
Well, thanks for sharing. We try to, this inside the Browns beat. We're trying to like the room, the room. It's kind of a small room of people to let let our viewers, get to know the people a little bit. What do you like? I mean, there's things being in the building every day, privy. I'm talking about I'm in the building, but I'm not in the building where you are. But you hear things, things that you really can't share. Um, when you hear people talk outside, I mean, how does that work with it keeping your mouth, or biting your lip when you
It is
know something?
it is kind of funny, I do catch things where we talk about things and I don't always know a ton before things happen, which is kind of funny. They do keep me in the dark a little bit, which I totally understand. But there are certain things where I hear things in passing, or you have conversations with people in the building, just because I've built relationships, with coaching staff members and scouts, and just kind of people around the building as I've gotten to know them. And you just have conversations, so you hear things. But it is funny because I'll hear when we're sitting in that room and people talking about things, and I'm just like, oh well, I've got to make sure I don't say anything, or that kind of thing. But it is kind of just funny because because it kind of sometimes I have to remind myself it's not common knowledge. I'm like, oh, this was a conversation I had with somebody in the building. This isn't something that's known outwardly. But it is just it's funny to think about.
Yeah, I mean, those first 3 years I was, doing what you're doing, and it was just the beginning of the internet. And so, there would be, there'd be things that would pop up, and you had to kind of go through the channels and go, do I even write about this? Do I talk about this, when it's critical of the team or whatever? So there's a fine balance, to, what you can do, what you can't do. But we look at now 0-2 start. It's first time under Kevin. They've lost first 2 games. I mean, what's some of your takes from last week's game? What you saw and where the team is going into another big test this week.
Yeah. So, and I know when we talk about this game, it's tough because we know what the final score was, 41-17, and like that looks rough. But I think one of the things that stood out to me in this game, and I wrote a column on it, of I really do think the defensive front, and the defense as a whole, but the defensive front especially, looks really strong about where they are. For through 2 weeks, they've held both the Bengals and the Ravens in the run game to 45, 46 yards apiece. And they held Derrick Henry to 23 yards, which you look at what he did in week 1, he ran all over the Bills. And so I think what they've been able to do, in the run defense is really strong, and I think a really good thing for them to build off of. I think in the pass rush, they're getting that pressure. The quarterback hits, the few sacks that they've had, they're applying that necessary pressure that I think is something that they can build on. And to me, and I know they don't like to kind of reference back to 2023 because it's a new team, but it's really giving me kind of hints of what this defense looked like in 2023. That pressure, that, making quarterbacks have to decide quickly what to do with the ball, either throw it away or, scramble and try to make a play because they're being pressured the way they are. And so I think that was a really big highlight for me from even just week 2, but the first 2 weeks as a whole. And then I think there are tons of things to still work on. I think the secondary, that needs to improve, of how you're covering these guys, especially when you know that, a guy like Lamar Jackson is going to try those long passes and find his guys. And so that man coverage has to be really strong in those situations. Kind of heading into this week, a similar thing of Jordan Love loves to throw a deep ball and find his guys and throw and move the ball around with multiple targets. So you have to also be prepared in man coverage to cover those guys and be ready for those shots. I think offensively, there's a lot more things to work through on that end. And I think a lot of it is really just a connection piece of, in the pass game, those guys have to catch the ball. And that's kind of what that comes down to. But it also comes down to their connection with Joe and how they have that chemistry of, if that route isn't available, but they have to kind of adjust, that they can read each other and they know what that's going to look like. And Joe has to react to changes in that. And so I think that's part of it. I think we've kind of seen some things with the offensive line, those injuries that they kind of dealt with, and, putting Cornelius Lucas in at right tackle because Jack was out, DeJuan Jones not being able to play the whole game. So you had KT Levinston in. I think some of those things, you don't have the cohesiveness of the offensive line. And not that it's an excuse, but it kind of changes the way the offensive line works as a unit. And so I think we saw some of that in how the success of the run game, not as many open running lanes as you would like, or the blocking needs to be a little bit improved in order to help with that. So I think there are things that are easily fixable, but there's things that they can improve. And I think we've seen those of like, okay, this isn't working as well as we want, but there's a base there. And then you just kind of have to work through that to get to the point where it is successful.
Well, you look at the defense, I agree with you, and when you stop the run, you kind of turn them into throwing the ball. But I'm concerned with the secondary behind Denzel Ward and Greg Newsome. You heard, Denzel today. It was the first time I've really seen somebody had cramps and really could not get back on the field. But when he's not on the field, they just picked apart the guys that went in for him, Cam Mitchell and Miles Harden. I mean, Lamar Jackson threw 4 touchdowns against those two guys. And I know it's all involved, but I mean, that's a concern, that you got to have some depth, behind Newsome and Ward, because we know teams are going to have 3 wide receivers. So I don't know where you come up with that depth.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, I don't know either, but I think some of it is those two are on the younger side of that grouping. And so I think some of it is exposure to those instances. So a guy like Miles Harden being put in those situations, it's tough because you're seeing the results of a young guy playing in that role. But I think through those experiences, that's ultimately going to make him better and be able to react and improve and be able to cover in those situations. Kind of similar, I think, with a guy like Cam. He's been in the system, but he's still younger in the sense of he's also not getting as many reps as guys like Greg or Denzel obviously are. But those two have to be ready to step in at any moment, like we saw with Denzel not being able to play like he could. That changes what that group looks like. And you have to have that depth there at that position because you're going to be targeted. If you can't cover the way that you need to, the opposing quarterbacks are going to, you will be the target. And so for those guys, I think it's a learning curve because they're on the quote unquote younger side, but I think it's really good learning opportunities. And I think they'll learn from it. Like I really do. I think the way that they study the film, the way that they want to get better, sometimes I think it is just exposure and experience in that situation. And yes, it obviously affects the results of the game, but I think ultimately in the long run, it'll end up making them stronger and better at their position.
Kelsey, Fred, while we're in the defensive backfield, I want to take it to the safeties for a minute, and I want to hear your guys' thoughts on this because the Browns trot out Grant Delpit, who really is kind of the modern NFL kind of hybrid safety linebacker type of player. He's what you would call a strong safety. He likes to come up, get involved in the box, make tackles, make big plays. But not much of a ball hawking safety is Grant Delpit. That's not really what he's known for, and that's okay. But it feels like you kind of are trotting 2 guys out there with similar desires and skill sets when you put out Grant Delpit and Ronnie Hickman, especially those 2 guys out there at the same time, because Ronnie's kind of the same kind of player. Likes to get dirty, likes to get in on hits, likes to lay the lumber a little bit. But again, neither guy major kind of ball hawking safeties, and Fred and I kind of earlier in the show were talking about just the lack of ability for this team to create turnovers and take the ball away from the other team. Is there, I don't know, your guys' thoughts on just the dynamics at safety and how much even more improved this defense could be if they had one of those just kind of real center field ball hawking kind of safeties out there?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting dynamic for sure because they like the skill sets of those two and what they bring to the defense and in that role. But like what you talked about with the lack of takeaways, that's where you see kind of that difference in the type of safety that they have. Now, I think their defense is more so built for Grant and Ronnie's skill sets. I think that kind of fits, Jim Schwartz's system, the way that they want to run their defense. But I think when it comes to the takeaway aspect, it's a kind of where you take a little bit of a step back. And so I think part of that is, and I think, Fred Denzel talked about it today of they have to look for those takeaways and look to make those plays where they can, but there is a balance of not wanting to do too much where you're seeking those out, but making the right play at the right time. And if that is an interception or that is, a pass breakup, that kind of thing, that's what is right in the moment. But I think, it's something that the guys have talked about even going back to last year. They only had 12 takeaways, 4 interceptions total, which was the lowest in the league. And I think that's something that going into this year, they really wanted their defense to be known for. They wanted to get takeaways. They want those interceptions. And that comes on, the corners, but also your safeties at the same time. So the secondary just working together. And I think because they have the mentality of they're looking for those opportunities, but it's not forcing those opportunities. I think that's kind of where they're at the moment. So I think they're going to come. And I think, there's going to be moments where Grant and Ronnie their skill sets are really going to shine because of how they play. And then, coming up with those interceptions maybe, but it's like their skill set is kind of built for that cleanup and, making those tackles, that kind of thing. But I think it's they're a different type of safety, but I think Schwartz has really, molded the defense to fit their skill sets.
Well, Juan Thornhill was the big free agent they brought in a couple years ago in Schwartz's system, and he was touted as a ball hawking free safety. That's what he did with Kansas City. He had no interceptions in his 2 years with the Browns. That's why they moved on from him. He's now with the Steelers. But when we talked to Schwartz in the spring and they hadn't signed any free agent, you kind of assumed they would sign a free agent. Like, I'm not talking about the guys they signed kind of at the end. I meant front line or draft a safety. They did not do either. And he talked about it was time for Ronnie Hickman to, his time to be a ball hawking safety. And he alluded to that. We all remember that Thursday night game that he had the pick six for a touchdown against the Jets in clinching. And now it's only 2 games, but we're still kind of waiting for that to happen. The Browns secondary had 3 interceptions. Ward had 2 and Newsome 1. None by the safety. So they really need something on that back end. And when they signed DeMonte KZ, he at one time led the NFL in interceptions one year. He had 7. I expected him maybe to be that guy. He hasn't really been playing at all other than special teams. It's Rayshawn Jenkins, who is more of a strong safety. So they kept undrafted rookie Donovan McMillan. They like him. I just don't know if he, is going to be able to break into the lineup this year or not. But yeah, I'm anxious to see Hickman break loose and break out and do what they want. Just so far, we haven't seen it. And I think that's what they need in this defense. That would really help set over the top, and it would also help the offense have shorter field position and everything if they could get some takeaways. And that's where the pass rush and all that comes into play. Strip sack, fumbles, all those type of things. And so it is working together, but to your point, we haven't seen it yet from the safeties.
Let's look ahead now for the next 10 minutes or so to this game against a Green Bay Packers team that, they make that move for Micah Parsons and become a big-time favorite to not just be a contender in their division with the Lions and the Vikings and all that, but really make a push and push for a Super Bowl. If you want to know something that really stands out to me, when I just look at the way things have gone for these two teams, again, Green Bay 2-0 on the year, two pretty convincing victories out of Green Bay. The Browns 0-2. Fred, you hit on this when we were talking earlier. Kelsey, your thoughts here too. You want to know something that's fairly stunning? Joe Flacco has thrown the ball 30 more times than Jordan Love has. 30 more times in 2 games than Jordan Love has. That, Fred, you hit it before. Your thoughts, Kelsey? That's probably not a great recipe for success, and that's nothing against Joe Flacco.
That's crazy, actually. I didn't even realize that number was that high because I just looked at their stats or Jordan's stats recently. I think I think what we saw from Jordan these first 2 weeks is his ability to connect with his receivers on deep throws and then setting up, they weren't always right into the end zone, but it would set them up for scoring drives. And that's really what pushed them forward in both of those games. And for the Browns and for Joe, they haven't had those explosive plays they're still kind of looking for those. It's been shorter passes, intermediate passes, the check down passes, and not necessarily an explosive play per se. And I think that's that difference of probably where that number comes from in a sense, because they're moving the ball in shorter distances, so you're taking more downs to move the ball versus Jordan and is leading the Packers downfield. I think last week he had a 57-yard catch. Another was a 36 or something like that. There was these really big chunk plays, and that makes such a difference in that of, one, you're not throwing the ball as often, but you're having success in moving your offense down the field and into the end zone. And so that, I think, is going to be a really big factor in this game on both sides of the ball, really, is how they move the ball downfield and how many explosive plays the Browns can pull off, and then how the defense limits the number of explosive plays of the Packers, because they've been able to capitalize through these 2 games. So I think that's going to be a really big factor in all of this.
Well, and the Packers in the 2 games have gotten off to 17-3 leads. That puts the opponent into passing, which isn't what the Browns want to do. I mean, what is your feeling on what Quinshon Judkins can interject now after another week into the running game, which can really set up a lot more options for the offense?
Yeah, I think he's going to be a great addition. I think we saw a little bit in this first game that he played. I mean, I think of that 31-yard run that he had late in the game, but the way that he was able to just kind of break through tackles, bounce off people, and kind of just find, his way through the Ravens defense, I think is something that the Browns are going to want to really build on. He showed his speed, he showed his shiftiness, the way that he can just hold on to the ball and make plays. And even if it is, not always a 31-yard run, but it's 8 yards, 10 yards, 12 yards. It's chunks of yardage that's going to move them down the field. And I think for this game especially, it's going to be such a balance of the run and the pass game. And while that's obviously a recipe for a lot of games, I think specifically with this game it will be, because the Packers defense is second. Their run defense is second in the league, just behind the Browns in yardage allowed per game. They're averaging 45.6 yards per game in the run game. So their run defense is really strong. And so, using Quinshon in finding those running lanes, using his ability to move the ball, move the chains. But if they get stopped, that's where then you have to find that kind of balance between using the pass game as well. But I think they have with their guys, I think that first week we saw Dylan Sampson. He had a great game. Yes, a lot of it came necessarily in the quote unquote pass game, but he caught the ball and then he ran for a good chunk of yardage. And so I think, you kind of have these 2 backs that you can deploy in different down situations and to get different yardages. And I think that's going to be also really crucial to sort of mix up what the run game looks like, because the Packers are going to try to do everything they can to limit Quinshon. They're going to try to take him out of the game, to shore up those running lanes so he can't get through, to bring him down behind the line of scrimmage. And so I think, using the two of them in some kind of capacity, but allowing Quinshon to find those spots and just take off is going to be crucial in them building this run game for the season, but especially against this Packers defense.
I think that was their off-season plan all along. When you went out and used a second and a fourth round to get Judkins and Sampson to be kind of like the Judkins and Travion Henderson model you saw at Ohio State, kind of offset each other and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, that's a clear that they're going to have to control the ball to keep a explosive 27-point game Packer offense off the field.
I think the other area that people are going to be concerned about, and the other area that people are going to watch, Kelsey and Fred, the offensive line for the Cleveland Browns has had its struggles. And this is a Packers defense that likes to live in the backfield. And, for the first time in his Browns tenure, even though he's had his moments of turnovers, I felt like I saw Joe Flacco really for the first time in his whole tenure in 23 and now here really flustered in that game against Baltimore. Whether Baltimore was sacking him or not, they were pressuring him. He was uncomfortable in the pocket. And now we've got a Green Bay team that is built that exact same way to just create pressure, create hurries, make the quarterback uncomfortable, make the running backs uncomfortable, collapse that offensive line. So, just from what you're hearing from the guys that obviously DeJuan Jones had to take time off in the last game. Conklin, I think, is back at practice, which is a good sign. But it's also this interior, this line, the guys you really are hoping can continue to be anchors in Bitonio and Teller and Posich up the middle. These guys are all going to have to step up in a big way. What have you heard or talked to these guys about, just saying that they're up to this challenge against Green Bay?
Yeah, I think you hit on it. I mean, that's what it is. They have to provide that protection. And I think some of that, what was tough against the Ravens was kind of having those guys out, having Jack out, bringing in Cornelius at that position. But the backups have to be ready for that role. That's kind of their job as the backup, is you step in whenever something happens and you got to be ready to go. And so I think some of that comes down to the chemistry and the continuity of that unit. But the core of that unit has been together for a while now. And I think that's the strength of the unit, is those guys like Teller, Posick. I mean, Jack Conklin's in that mix, Bitonio, like they've been together as a unit and they know the tells of one another. They know kind of how to communicate and protect without even really having to talk to one another. And so I think they've just faced tough defensive line, and this is going to continue this week, but I think it really needs to be a point of emphasis of you have to be able to help Joe, you have to protect him, but it also comes down to of how the running backs block, how the tight ends block in different situations as well, to give Joe that time. So I think it's kind of a combination of everybody, but it really does start with the offensive line. And it also then, I think, on the flip side, Joe has to be able to react, and he's done this in his 18-year career, but when the pocket is collapsing, being able to make a quick decision and either just throw the ball away or find that check down, just find an outlet. But I think some of that was it just happened so fast against the Ravens. But this is going to be another really big test because Micah Parsons is going to be coming for him. And they have, the quarterback hit set that this defensive line has coming into the season already is crazy. And so I think I think they have the mentality, though. They know what they're facing in this defensive front. They know what Micah Parsons is going to bring to this game, and you're game planning for that. But a lot of it's just going to come down to execution in the game, knowing, they have to get hats on hats. That was one thing that Joel Bitonio talked about after week one, honestly, was just the need to get hats on hats. And I think that mentality of knowing that that's sort of their approach that they're going to have to do for this game and then find a solution to also take out Micah Parsons from this game as much as you can, is going to be that strategy. But that hats on hats element is really important for the offensive line to just be able to block, to protect, and to give Joe that time.
I felt the offensive line really could be the strength of the offense this year, with the 430-something returning veterans and then Dewan. But they had to stay healthy, and Jack Conklin now hasn't been able to stay on the field. He got poked in the eye the first quarter, the first game. He missed the rest of that game. He was ready to go last week until he got an elbow injury during the game, and he was scratched. So he's only played one quarter. He was back today, limited, but Joe Bitonio didn't practice today with a back injury, so it was listed as a back injury, not rest. Now, he has done that in the past, had back problems and still played, but you want to see them in sync. And in Dewan, they scheduled, he said, 10 plays or 2 series for him to take a breather last week. So you want to get those 5 guys working together and creating a little push. And that's what I think where the back that Judkins is can really help them, because the offensive line is what they were, and the group was really performing well when Nick Chubb was at his peak, and he didn't need a big crease to go off for 150 yards. And so that's what I'm thinking when they get these guys all together, but they got to stay on the field. So hopefully they'll get back this week and be ready to go, but it's going to be a tough one. The last thing I have, and Mike, I have Kelsey, what do you see as a pathway to a win this week?
That's a great question. I think the path to it on the defensive side of the ball is going to be limiting those explosive plays for sure. I think if you can take out any explosives, that's going to give this defense a chance to play that stout defense, that attack style that they want to, and that they're building towards. But you have to be able to take out the explosives, because that's been kind of their juggernaut, or the Packers' juggernaut so far. I think offensively, I really do think it's going to come down to finding that balance of a run in the pass, looking for explosive plays where you can, but not forcing them, because I think that is where they will get into trouble. But also just finding those opportunities in the run game where they can, and then in the pass game, and just kind of meticulously moving the ball down the field. I think we kind of saw that in week 1 against the Bengals. They just kind of meticulously moved in those little chunks, and they eventually got down there. And yes, that's hard to play in 11, 12, 16 play series, but if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. And that could be their key to success. Of the longer that they can stay on the field as an offense, I think is going to give them the best shot, because then you're limiting how much time Jordan's on the field and those explosive plays. But if you can just take time off the clock and then get in the end zone and score, you're going to give yourself a shot, because now you've taken up a big chunk of time. And then, the Packers are kind of in a tighter situation with having to make decisions and try to score in a shorter amount of time when they're on the field.
Well, Kelsey, Fred, Cleveland Browns, Green Bay Packers, Sunday, 1:00. Browns are going to be in their Alpha Dog. Hold on, I got to get this right. It's the Alpha Dog presented by Dude Wipes. I can't sometimes with this. They're going to be in the all Browns, the Alpha Dog uniforms, which I think would look really cool in a night game, but they just don't have the opportunity to do that. So, hey, day game it is. They're going to be out there in the all Browns, the new helmets, first time against the Green Bay Packers. To get you ready for it, you can get over to Browns.com and read everything that Kelsey is putting out there throughout the course of the week. You can follow her, Kelsey Russo, on X. You can do the same thing with Fred as he does that for the OBR. Kelsey, it was great talking Browns with you. It was great reminiscing about Georgia, the Georgia Bulldogs. Also, one of the worst football games I've ever been to. I went to the 2008 Sugar Bowl when they played Hawaii. It was the worst football game I've ever been to in my life.
That's fair.
But that wasn't Georgia's fault. That was not Georgia's fault. beautiful. The Bulldogs going to be looking to do some big things this year, and we'll see who gets in their way. But listen, it was a great time having you on. Great stuff that you do with the Browns. Appreciate everything you did with the Cavs, and we look forward to following you more throughout the course of the season and beyond. Thank you so much for coming on with us, Kelsey.
Of course. Thank you guys for having me. It was really fun. I really enjoyed being able to chat. And so, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Kelsey. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Fred.
Big shout out to Kelsey Russo. Again, go follow her at Kelsey Russo on the Twitters or X. I don't know, whatever you call it. And make sure you tune in to Browns.com to check out everything Kelsey is putting out there. Fred, you kept talking about how you were the original Browns.com beat writer with just walking around Berea with your chisel and your tablet there, getting some notes.
It wasn't that long ago. It was in the same building that we're in now.
Well, that doesn't mean much, Fred.
Yeah, they've just done 10 renovations since, and they've just kept moving the media room further and further away from everybody.
Oh my gosh. Well, I love it. I love it. Again, big time shout out to Kelsey. Shout out to everybody that joined us here tonight. Again, next week, a couple changes. Fred is on vacation next week, which we're letting it happen. He submitted his request. We weren't happy about it. But Fred's going on the family vacation. I'm just joking. We're very happy about it. So, Fred, we're going to miss you next week, but Inside the Browns Beat will be here. Fred already announced one guest. We're probably going to have another one on as well for that show. So it'll be myself. It'll be Jeff Shadell coming on to talk Cleveland Browns with us, who I have a feeling Jeff's going to have a lot of interesting stuff to say, because if you had to let people rank interesting questions as they happen in press conferences, Jeff is up there on a pretty consistent basis. So Jeff Shadell will be here. And again, we'll announce it over the course of the week on who else may or may not be joining us for Inside the Browns Beat next week as well. Fred, have a great time on vacation. Enjoy the trip, because when you get back, it's the dog days time. It's time for the dog days.
Yeah, Jeff started when I was an intern, so he's been around as long as I have, and he's got a lot of stories. And he covers the Cavs and the Guardians as well. So that'll be a great one. And I'll miss y'all. Thank you for tuning in. I'll be back in 2 weeks from tonight, for this show, but I'll be back before that. So check it all out. Thanks again, Mike. Thanks for everybody listening. And thank you to Kelsey for coming on.
Yep, definitely. Again, shameless plug here. Make sure you go get yourself a bathroom break, grab a snack, do whatever you got to do, and then grab yourself a beer. Come back and hang out with us on Garage Beers at 9 o'clock. We are talking about those Cleveland Guardians. We're talking about the Browns, college football, and so much more. It's going to be a great time on Garage Beers, and it happens at 9 o'clock, so make sure you join us for that. Otherwise, get over to theobr.com, hit subscribe and like wherever you're watching the show here tonight, and we will see you next week for Inside the Browns Beat. He is Fred. I am Mike. And as always, go Browns.